The History Hound Dog presents 9 Hours Before Death. Created by Subversive Thinking Productions. Photo provided by Tina Gillian Glessner. Narrated by Bankston Brand. Hello, I'm your host Bankston Brand. A photo of Abraham Lincoln, as he lay dying in a small back room at the Petersens boarding house. The photo was taken about 15 to 25 minutes after he was shot. Some say this photo couldn't have been taken. But it was, and the evidence proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is in fact Abraham Lincoln, dying at the Petersens. So please stay with us as we present the evidence we've uncovered. The night Lincoln was shot, there were two brothers staying at the boarding house. Henry Elk and his brother Julius. Both men were experienced photographers. As the president was taken into the boarding house, Julius Elk was scrambling to get his photographic equipment. The glass plate negative that was used was most likely already prepared much earlier and on standby in case there was something interesting to photograph. Then a once-in-a-lifetime shot came Julius's way, irresistible to a photographer. I seriously doubt Julius knew if the photo would be visible or a complete mess. But Julius couldn't pass this chance up regardless of the outcome. Immediately after the photo was taken, Julius did something extraordinarily unusual. He rushed up the stairs to his room. Instead of making a tintype photo, he exposed the photo onto a piece of leather. It is not known what prompted Julius to do so. Maybe someone told him his room could be searched, and the negative glass plate could be confiscated, or maybe his brother Henry went upstairs and warned Julius that the United States Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton, was getting ready to have the room searched. Regardless of how it happened, Julius was trying to hide this print. And this is the reason it was placed onto the leather to start with. One could only imagine Stanton walking into the room with Mary Lincoln wailing out and then seeing the camera set up at the foot of the bed, and then being told about the photo. He was so outraged he even ordered Mary Lincoln to be removed from the room. It is very plausible that, at this moment he gave the orders, that no photos were to be taken of Lincoln. Something prompted Stanton to give these orders, and more than likely this was it. Only the men present know what Stanton said that night, as he entered the room, but whatever it was severely threatening, because the photo was never mentioned, and that moment in time was completely erased from history. The words that Stanton spoke was such a threat, it instilled fear into Julius, so much so that even the deathbed photos were never released to the public eye. Only hand-drawn pictures were circulated. This would lead one to believe that the deathbed photos were also taken without authorization. If the photos would have been released, it would have generated a small fortune. The photos were found by Julius's family, almost 100 years later, and then they were released, but they did not recognize the one of Lincoln, and it eventually ended up at a flea market in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. Glancing at the photo, it looks as though it's been pasted onto the leather substrata, but actually a small oval area of the leather was coated with a light-sensitive emulsion, and a contact print was placed onto it. It is unclear where the piece of leather came from. The leather is crudely cut on 3 sides and one side is a nice straight manufactured cut, giving the impression that it was from a shoulder bag or something of that nature. When this photo became a topic of discussion, many tried to convince everyone that the photographic equipment was much too large and cumbersome to allow it to be moved quickly into the room. But in 1865 photos were made by a method called contact printing. The negative was placed onto a piece of tin coated with the light-sensitive emulsion. A slight amount of pressure was held on the edges of the negative and a light was slowly passed over it. A large photo would require a large camera. Cameramen in the field photographing the Civil War, for instance, would try to capture the largest photo possible. In doing so, it would require an extremely large camera. But this photo is rather small. Its measurements are 1.5 inches by 2 inches. It is unknown what type of camera was used by Julius on that night. But it certainly wasn't a large cumbersome camera. Within a 10-hour period, Julius captured 3 photos with the same camera. Some believe that in 1865 they couldn't produce enough light to even consider trying to take a photo inside at night, but this was not the problem. At this point in time they were illuminating entire theaters. The problem with taking photos under this type of lighting produced disastrous results. The flames would move around erratically. In turn, all the shadows on the subject would do the same. The shadows would move so erratically it would wash out all the detail, leaving the subject unrecognizable, as has happened to this photo. Here are 2 doctors describing Lincoln's facial condition. It seems at times they were confused about his right side and left. But this is a common mistake when looking at a subject. His right side would be their left.
Statement by Robert K. Stone, Lincoln's family physician. While engaged about him, rendering all the aid in my power, I noticed the appearance of a black or purple spot at the internal angle of the right eye. This, occupying the position of the circle of ophthalmic sinus, gradually increased in size, invading the whole orbital periphery until the right eye was surrounded by a zone of the most intense ecchymosis. This, gradually increased, the effusion was formed into the subconjunctival cellular tissue of this lately affected eye. The ball of the eye became prominent by slow degrees until the zone around the eye orbit was complete, and then the protrusion reached its greatest point, until the ball seemed to protrude 1 inch at least from its socket. After a short time, when the intensity of the left orbit ecchymosis had reached its intensity, we noticed that the left pupil began to quite slowly dilate, until the dilation of both pupils was equal. Dr. Taft. The left upper eyelid was swollen and dark from effused blood. This was observed a few minutes after his removal from the theater. About 30 minutes after he was placed upon the bed, discoloration from effusion began in the internal canthus of the right eye, which became rapidly discolored and swollen, with great protrusion of the eye. About 11:30 p.m., twitching of the facial muscles of the left side set in and continued some 15 or 20 minutes, and the mouth was drawn slightly to the same side.
Now moving on. Another thing that was never mentioned was Lincoln's bloody nose. It is very difficult to see by just glancing at the photo. But once it is seen, it is easily spotted thereafter. Looking at the left-hand glove in the photo, it doesn't look like much. But this was an important discovery. The glove has a wrinkle that has cast a shadow resembling the number 7. The same wrinkle is found on the actual left-hand glove that Lincoln was wearing the night he was shot. It's residing at the museum. Is this a coincidence? It's highly unlikely. This is a watch and fob believed to be worn by Lincoln the night he was assassinated. But until now there was no evidence to verify this claim. Why the fob was positioned like this is unknown. Maybe to let everyone know that this was Lincoln. But due to blur in the photo it became a major task identifying it from the things that surround it. The blurring in the photo has caused the L to bleed together. But the A is perfectly visible. And in light of all the other evidence, it's very clear that this is the fob of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln had 2 moles above his left eye. These moles appeared in a number of the photos taken of him. The 2 moles are also present in this photo. Another thing that has been asked numerous times. Where is all the blood? Here are a few of the blood spots encircled on the pillow. The reason the pillow isn't a total mess is his head had just been placed onto the pillow. Some try to compare the pillow in this photo with the bloody pillow in the deathbed photos. But this photo was taken about 8.5 hours before the deathbed photos were. This photo of Lincoln has 2 prominent blood spots on it. These 2 spots are also on the actual pillow that was under Lincoln's head throughout the night. The 2 spots on the actual pillow were aligned with the 2 blood spots in the Lincoln photo. As the actual pillow was faded in and out on the death photo, it was noted that the pillow proportioned out perfectly in height and width. This is not the only indicator that this was the pillow under Lincoln's head, but it is the only pillow that was on the deathbed completely saturated by water. The area where Lincoln's head can be seen on the pillow would have had a large blood stain on it. But the water has washed it to one side. Why these few blood spots remained is unknown. But it was a lucky thing that they did. All the pillows and pillowcases do not show this type of extreme saturation. But there is a very plausible explanation as to how it became saturated.
Fred Petersen found his father sound asleep in his tailor shop. Soon they were heading home on the wet clay streets, a cold mist enveloping them as they walked. By the time they returned, Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton had thrown open the death room windows to let in some fresh air. The president's face was cold as stone, and the blackness had spread beyond the eyes to the forehead. That wasn't what threw William Petersen off, though when Petersen's eyes fell on the stinking piles of bloody bandages and leaking mustard plaster, he became unplugged. The heaps of medical refuse loomed large in the narrow hallway. The boarding house owner stormed into the death room and rudely grabbed the stained top pillow out from under the dead president's head, terrifying the Elk brothers. Raising the thick window blinds, he tossed the pillow, possibly still wet with Mr. Lincoln's blood, out onto the fieldstone courtyard 2 stories below. As soon as he came to his senses, Petersen loudly explained that his house was a mess, full of mud and unwashed basins.
Is this story true? Or was it beefed up a bit, so to speak? Looking at the death photo of Lincoln, a large wrinkle is just inches away from his right shoulder. It is standing straight up. This same wrinkle is on the pillow in the deathbed photo. It has fallen over as Lincoln's head was removed from it. This indicates that this exact pillow was under Lincoln's head throughout the night. This also indicates that the pillow wasn't pulled from under Lincoln's head as the story says, simply by the fact it is still on the bed as Julius took these photos and Lincoln is nowhere in sight. The story did say it was drizzling rain outside, and it is obvious the pillow was thrown out the window. But this was after Julius had taken the second deathbed photo. Another thing it lets us know is that Julius and his brother Henry were still in the room when William Petersen returned home and entered the room. There was a guard placed at the front door to keep people out. But the guard was unaware that Julius was in the room taking photographs because they were already in the house. And as can be seen in these two deathbed photos, there are no heaping piles of bloody linen in the hallway. And Stanton is nowhere to be seen. Now if you would permit, I'd like to draw your attention to this small area at the side of the pillow. This small area tells a story in itself. The two arrows are pointing at two illuminations. These two illuminations are actually caused by a light source reflecting off of the very top of the headboard. The different patterns that the headboard can create can be seen in these two photos of the actual deathbed headboard. Here it can be seen what a single light source creates. It illuminates a single string of reflection across the top of the headboard. But in this photo of the actual deathbed, a light source is coming from above and the light is reflecting off of the pillow onto the headboard. The reflection from the pillow creates a double string of reflection. In the death photo of Lincoln, it shows a double illuminated reflection. And this indicates that there was a light source from above and below. Here a cutout from the actual deathbed has been pasted onto the Lincoln photo. And this is positively what made this image in the photo of Lincoln. In this photo, a white semicircle has been added to the area of interest. This area contains a light circle. This light circle was created by someone holding a coal oil lamp near Lincoln's face. This was done so they could illuminate the right side of his face. There was no need to hold a lamp on the left side because there was a natural gas lamp mounted on the wall that was producing a substantial amount of light on that side. It is said that a multitude of people had seen Lincoln carried across the street half nude after his clothing had been cut off at the theater. But looking at Lincoln's clothing, they are not cut. They are intact with no signs of being cut. Still there are reports of the clothing being cut off. So why are there so many eyewitnesses that said they saw Lincoln without his clothing? As they were cutting through Lincoln's bow tie, his removable collar fell off. Then they ripped the front of his shirt open. Someone shouted to cutting his clothing off. And this rumor spread like wildfire out into the streets. How it came to the point of his frock coat and vest being cut off is unknown. But the reason so many saw him nude was they had prior knowledge that his clothing had been cut off. They didn't actually see it. They just wanted a piece of the action. They wanted to be the ones that saw him nude from the waist up. As they carried Lincoln out into the streets, the army kept the people well away from Lincoln. The people saw absolutely nothing. But who would want to admit to that? It boils down to the fact everyone saw everything.
Dr. Todd stated Taft and Leal cut away Lincoln's blood-stained collar and opened his shirt. And Leal, feeling around by hand, discovered the bullet hole in the back of his head.
Here the collar has threads hanging from it where it was tore open. Behind his right shoulder there is a small piece of fabric protruding out near his neck. It is absolutely not part of the pillow.
Dr. Leal reported. His bleeding head rested on my white linen handkerchief. His clothing was arranged as nicely as possible. His clothing was arranged as nicely as possible. His clothing was arranged as nicely as possible. He was irregularly breathing. His heart was feebly beating. His face was pale and in solemn repose. His eyelids were closed. His countenance made him appear to be in prayerful communion with the universal God he always loved.
Dr. Leal explained clearly what he had done to Lincoln's clothing before leaving the theater. He even went as far as to place Lincoln's bow tie back under his chin. It is difficult to see in this photo, but the neckband is hanging down from both sides of the bow tie, because it was cut off at the theater. As he was placed in the bed at the boarding house, his clothing was in the same position as he arranged them at the theater, as nicely as possible. Even the paintings and drawings depict Lincoln with all of his clothing on, as they carried him across the street.
Souls reported. We 4 fellows carried him to the stairway in the theater, with his feet foremost, Souls remembered in 1931. I was down at his feet with one of the fellows. We had him out on the street about 5 minutes until we found a place to put him. There was a boarding house across the street, run by a William Petersen. As word spread through the neighborhood of the president's shooting, a tenant of the boarding house came outside, holding a lantern. "Bring him in here. Bring him in here." Lincoln felt limp, as if all the fight had gone out of him, Souls remembered. Guards cleared the aisles and we walked to the door, and then directly across the street, the 6 of us carrying him as gently as we could.
At the doctor's orders, Soul and his companions lifted the president, who had been laying out on the floor, while Leal examined him, and began carrying Lincoln out of the box. Souls said that he and another soldier held Lincoln down at his feet, while 2 other men held him at his head. As they neared a staircase leading out of the theater, Souls said, 2 other soldiers held the president's sagging torso, in an effort to steady his body. Once outside, Souls said the group carrying Lincoln paused at the curb for about 5 minutes, while soldiers cleared a path, and they could find a place to take the president. When they carried Lincoln out into the street, it was 57 degrees outside, very cool and damp. So here we have Lincoln, in the street with an acute head wound, half naked, being held by his feet and head. It seems the ride to the White House would have been less evasive than what he was put through. How did they carry Lincoln across the street? There are a few eyewitnesses that said they used an improvised stretcher to carry him. Some said it was a board of some sort. But one of the soldiers that carried him said as they came out of the theater, 2 other soldiers helped support his sagging torso. If it was a board, his torso never would have sagged. So what did they use as a makeshift stretcher? This newspaper article says that this shawl was involved somehow that night. It is very plausible. It was used as the makeshift stretcher. The soldier did say his torso was sagging. And this would make perfectly good sense. It would have allowed 2 men at his feet and 2 at his head or shoulder area. Dr. Leal said he supported the head.
Shawl that covered the dead president. Still stained with Lincoln's blood, the wrap is a striking reminder of the tragic night of April 14, 1865, when the president was fatally wounded by John Wilkes Booth, an actor in Ford's Theater, Washington. The shawl covered him when he died in the home of William Petersen, a tailor, across the street. Mrs. Haar is related to Alexander Williamson, who was tutor for Lincoln's son Tad. Williamson's mother presented it to the president, and the family still treasures the letters of thanks. Mrs. Betty Perrin displaying the shawl worn by Lincoln the night of his assassination. The dark spot to the right of her brooch is a blood stain.
Another thing that must be taken into consideration, if they would have used a board, it would have been very easy for Lincoln to roll off. By using the shawl it would have cradled him, and it would have allowed his torso to sag, as described by the soldier, named Souls, that helped carry him. Carrying Lincoln across the street was not the last time they used the shawl. When the soldiers removed Lincoln's body from the Petersens, they wrapped his body in the shawl and a blanket, before placing his body in the pine box. It's also believed that the pillow that was under his shoulders was placed in the box to rest his head upon, simply for the fact it's not seen in the deathbed photo. When Lincoln was carried out into the street, Henry Safford stood in the door of the Petersen house, holding a candle, and shouted, "Bring him in here." And he was there, as Lincoln died. He explained exactly what was done with Lincoln's body in preparation for removal from the Petersens.
Henry S. Safford's reminiscence. The body was wrapped in a shawl and blanket, and deposited in a box.
The shawl can't be seen in this photo due to the conditions it was taken under. But the shawl is wrapped around the president, very little of his suit can be seen. This is because the shawl is covering most of it, except for a small portion. But there are some small signs of the shawl in the photo. Here are some of the loops on the edge of it. Some of the questions that have arose when the photo first came into the public eye. One that comes to mind is, what did they do, build a scaffold over the bed, to get this straight down shot of Lincoln? But looking at the photo with the headboard pasted into it, it is very clear that it wasn't an overhead shot, it was absolutely taken from the foot of the bed. Another question is, where are the whiskers on the side of his face? It is a known fact that the last photos taken of Lincoln, his beard was shaved down to a goatee. It was noted that after his death someone shaved his beard down to a small goatee, but this was because after one dies the body loses moisture and the pores shrink. In turn it causes stubble to appear as growth, and must be shaved, or the corpse would have stubble. And they did not want that on the president as he was viewed by the masses. In light of all the evidence, it is obvious that this is a photo of Abraham Lincoln, dying at the Petersen house. Many more discoveries have been made pertaining to the night he was shot. If there is enough likes added, there will be a second video made explaining more. If not, I guess this will be the end. All of this has been collected from years of hard work. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment video. Even with all the evidence that has been presented, there are a few individuals following the photo around on the internet criticizing its authenticity, and I'm sure they will appear here below in the comments. All that we ask for is an honest judgment on the photo, nothing more, and thanks to each and every one for watching regardless of your decision.